The thunder of war doesn't wait for the cautious. And in the chaos of battle, machines often fail at the most critical moments. But every so often, amid the smoke and steel, a single mind emerges. Unpredictable, brilliant, and relentless. Capable of transforming disaster into legend. This is the story of one such man. A mechanic whose unorthodox methods, stubborn genius, and sheer courage turned a seemingly broken tank into a symbol of innovation that would echo far beyond the battlefield. It began in the bitter winter of 1942 on the Eastern Front, where the unforgiving Russian winter had already claimed more lives than bullets. The German advance was stalling near a small village on the outskirts of Stalingrad, and the Panzer divisions were bleeding men and machines at an alarming rate. Among the wreckage of abandoned tanks, one particular vehicle drew attention, not for its size or firepower, but for the peculiar figure hunched over the exposed engine block, tools scattered across the frozen ground. He was Karl Meinhardt, a mechanic nicknamed Verrückt, the madman by his comrades. Karl had joined the Wehrmacht as a simple mechanic, but those who knew him describe a mind that worked differently. While others followed manuals and protocols, Karl listened to the engine as though it were a living creature. He could identify a failing piston by the pitch of its metallic groan, detect a misaligned track by the rhythm of its clatter, and sense a cooling problem before it ever appeared on the gauges. In the accounts of surviving soldiers, he moved with a mix of impatience and obsession, speaking to the machines as if arguing with a stubborn animal. "It's not broken," he would mutter. "It just refuses to fight without respect." On this cold morning, the tank in question was considered irreparable. Its engine had seized, the transmission was shot, and the electrical system lay in ruins after a direct hit from artillery. Standard procedure dictated to be abandoned or salvaged for parts. But Karl refused to let it die. With nothing but a toolbox, a handful of spare parts scavenged from nearby wrecks, and an audacious plan, he began his work. Witnesses describe him working feverishly, often crawling beneath the hull in temperatures so low that breath crystallized in the air. Sparks flew as he welded, hammered, and rewired, improvising solutions that would have seemed insane to any trained engineer. A broken gear became a makeshift component from a motorcycle engine. Stripped wiring was replaced with wires salvaged from discarded radios. Every move was calculated but unconventional, a delicate dance between genius and sheer luck. Meanwhile, the front lines were shifting. Soviet artillery pounded the area in regular intervals, forcing Karl and a few brave assistants to work under constant threat of death. Yet, with each hour, the tank began to stir. First, a faint wheeze from the engine, then a hesitant click from the gears. By the third day, the tank, considered lost, rumbled to life, a testament to human ingenuity under impossible circumstances. But no one knew then that what Karl had accomplished was more than mechanical repair. He had reimagined the tank's capabilities, reinforcing weak points, optimizing its engine for the harsh winter, and even experimenting with a unique suspension modification that improved mobility over rough terrain. What happened next shocked both sides of the war. The moment of truth came sooner than anyone expected. By late January 1942, the frozen plains near Stalingrad had become a chessboard of fire and steel. German forces were entrenched, Soviet counterattacks relentless, and supply lines stretched to the breaking point. Amid this chaos, Karl's resurrected tank, nicknamed Der Geist by the men, the Ghost, rolled silently out of the makeshift repair yard. Its battered hull bore scars of previous engagements. Yet beneath the surface, it hummed with an unnatural vitality. Soldiers whispered that the tank had a soul, and in a way, it did. Karl's obsession had imbued it with a new life. On its first mission, the tank was assigned a reconnaissance role, probing enemy positions while avoiding the main Soviet artillery barges. Observers described the scene in vivid detail. The tank moving with an eerie smoothness across frozen mud, the tracks barely making a sound, the engine responding instantly to every command. Karl, usually hidden under the hood, now rode inside the turret, making real-time adjustments. He twisted valves, rerouted power, and even improvised a makeshift periscope to improve visibility in blinding snowstorms. What happened next would become legendary. Soviet forces, expecting a sluggish, damaged vehicle, were caught off guard. The Ghost outmaneuvered anti-tank emplacements, navigated minefields that had trapped other panzers, and even survived a near-direct artillery strike by sheer improvisation. Karl had modified the armor plating using welded scrap metal from destroyed vehicles, creating a patchwork defense that was surprisingly effective. Soldiers on both sides later recounted seeing the tank appear out of the smoke like a phantom, striking with precision and disappearing before retaliation could be mounted. But Karl's genius was not limited to mechanics. He understood the psychology of warfare. He encouraged his crew to think creatively, to improvise, to use the environment to their advantage. When the tank became temporarily stuck in deep snow, Karl instructed his men to fill the treads with planks from destroyed buildings, turning disaster into mobility. "The machine fights as the mind commands," he reportedly said, a phrase that would echo in military circles for decades. Meanwhile, German commanders began to notice something extraordinary. Reports described the tank achieving feats that should have been impossible, breaking through enemy lines that had stopped whole battalions, surviving ambushes that had destroyed similar vehicles, and returning to base with minimal damage. Officers initially dismissed these reports as exaggeration, but repeated accounts forced recognition. Karl, the mad mechanic, was no longer a mere repairman. He had become a tactical asset, a one-man innovation laboratory embedded directly on the battlefield. Yet, the Soviet forces were not idle. Word of the Ghost spread quickly, and their commanders devised countermeasures specifically to neutralize this mysterious tank. Mines were concentrated in its expected path, artillery calibrated to hit its reinforced sections, and ambushes laid with precision. For the first time, Karl faced a test not of engineering, but of survival. In one harrowing engagement, the tank came under heavy fire from 3 directions simultaneously. The ground trembled as shells exploded, tearing through the earth and sending shrapnel across the hull. It was in that moment that Karl's full ingenuity was revealed. According to surviving crew members, he directed the tank into a frozen riverbed, exploiting the ice's reflective surface to confuse the gunners. Using a combination of modified suspension, precise engine control, and improvised armor, the Ghost emerged unscathed, leaving both allies and enemies in stunned silence. Some soldiers later whispered that the tank seemed alive, responding to the battlefield with a mind of its own. But no story of ingenuity in war is without cost. Karl and his crew would soon face their greatest challenge yet, a situation that would test the limits of his mechanical genius, the endurance of his men, and the very idea that one man could bend war machines to his will. By the spring of 1942, the Ghost had achieved near-mythical status among the panzer units. Soldiers spoke of it in hushed tones around campfires, their voices tinged with awe. Yet, as winter thawed into mud-choked roads, Karl Meinhardt faced a challenge unlike any before, a full-scale Soviet counteroffensive aimed at encircling German forces near the Don River. The Ghost would no longer simply navigate reconnaissance missions. It would be thrust into a desperate struggle for survival and tactical supremacy. The battle began in the gray light of dawn, with the horizon lined by Soviet T-34s and KV-1s. Their numbers were overwhelming, their firepower relentless, and their tactics evolving. Karl's unit was ordered to hold a strategic bridge that controlled the movement of troops and supplies. Without it, the German advance would stall, and thousands of soldiers would be trapped. Commanders initially doubted that a single tank, no matter how ingeniously repaired, could withstand such an assault. Yet Karl, true to his reputation, prepared for the impossible. Inside the Ghost, he adjusted the engine and fine-tuned the hydraulics, transforming the vehicle into a finely balanced weapon. He reinforced weak joints, added extra chains to the tracks for traction in muddy terrain, and recalibrated the firing mechanism for a rapid burst, anticipating the T-34's superior maneuverability. Crew members recalled Karl speaking quietly to the machine, almost as if coaxing it to fight. "Show them who built you. Make them remember." As the first Soviet tanks approached, Karl executed a daring maneuver. He led the Ghost down an abandoned side road, nearly hidden by the smoke of artillery and the fog of war. Using his knowledge of terrain, he exploited a narrow embankment that allowed the Ghost to ambush the lead T-34, disabling its tracks with a precise shot. The effect was immediate and devastating. The following Soviet vehicles collided in confusion, creating a bottleneck that Karl's crew could exploit. What happened next would cement Karl's place in armored warfare history. For over 8 hours, the Ghost engaged in a relentless back and forth with superior Soviet forces. Karl's improvisations on the fly, using pieces of wreckage as makeshift armor, rerouting power to maintain mobility after each hit, and even utilizing the terrain to create cover where none existed, allowed the tank to survive assaults that should have destroyed it. Crew testimonies describe moments when Karl manually repaired the engine under fire, hands bleeding and frozen, refusing to stop even as shells exploded around him. Meanwhile, soldiers witnessing the Ghost in the ground spoke of a surreal scene. A single tank repeatedly defying logic, moving fluidly through obstacles, striking at critical points, and vanishing before enemy fire could land. One German officer noted in his diary, "It is as though the machine moves with intention, as though it knows the battle better than any of us." Even Soviet reports, later declassified, referred to an anomalous panzer whose actions confounded tactics and morale. But the fight was far from over. By late afternoon, the Ghost was damaged beyond conventional repair. A direct hit had pierced a reinforced hull, wounding 2 crew members and leaving the engine partially disabled. Karl faced a moment of impossible choice: abandon the tank and retreat, or attempt a final, desperate improvisation to save it, and possibly change the course of the engagement. It was here that Karl's reputation as the mad mechanic reached its zenith. With calm precision under fire, he removed the remaining damaged components, repurposed nearby metal fragments to patch breaches in the hull, and jury-rigged a temporary engine bypass. The tank shuddered, coughed, and roared back to life, limping but functional. Using every ounce of skill and intuition, Karl maneuvered the Ghost through enemy lines, drawing fire away from retreating German units. By nightfall, the tank had not only survived but had facilitated the withdrawal of hundreds of soldiers, turning what could have been a catastrophic encirclement into a narrowly avoided disaster. Yet, as dawn approached, Karl and his crew knew the cost of genius. The Ghost, battered and scarred, was no longer an unstoppable force. It was a fragile monument to improvisation, courage, and the relentless will of a single man. War historians would later describe the engagement as a turning point in small unit armor tactics, a demonstration of how ingenuity could compensate for numerical and technological inferiority. But for Karl, the question lingered: could one man and one machine truly defy the tide of war, or was the Ghost destined to become a legend precisely because it was fleeting a rare intersection of brilliance and circumstance? The battle over the Don River became a story told in whispers and later in official reports. Yet the man behind it remained almost mythical. Karl Meinhardt returned to base with the Ghost, its hull scarred, tracks bent, and turret riddled with shrapnel. To the untrained eye, it was a ruined tank, a relic of chaos. But Karl saw something else: proof that ingenuity, determination, and an intimate understanding of machinery could bend the rules of war. In the weeks that followed, commanders and engineers alike came to study the Ghost. Military reports documented the modifications Karl had made: reinforced armor plating from salvaged materials, an improvised engine bypass that allowed continued operation after catastrophic failure, and the suspension tweaks that had allowed unprecedented mobility on frozen and uneven terrain. These innovations, born out of desperation and necessity, would influence German armored tactics for the rest of the war. Engineers later noted that many of Karl's unconventional solutions anticipated design principles that would only appear in formal tank upgrades years later. But Karl himself remained an enigma. To his peers, he was unpredictable, often disappearing into the workshops for days, emerging with some improbable fix or prototype. To the soldiers who had served with him, he was more than mechanic. He was a savior, a figure whose brilliance had turned the tide in moments when all seemed lost. And yet, Karl did not seek fame. In personal letters recovered decades later, he wrote simply, "The machine is only as strong as the mind that commands it. I do not deserve the credit. It was the tank and the war that taught me." Meanwhile, stories of the Ghost spread beyond the German lines. Soviet intelligence reported unusual patterns, a single tank accomplishing what entire battalions could not. Soldiers spoke of a steel phantom moving with unnatural agility, striking with precision, and surviving when logic dictated it should have fallen. The legend of the mad mechanic grew, a story passed down in both official reports and oral histories. Some historians speculate that this legend influenced Soviet tactics, prompting them to innovate and adapt faster than they otherwise might have. After the war, the ghost itself became a symbol. Parts of it were preserved in museums, studied by engineers and historians alike, a testament to Carl's daring and ingenuity. Today, armored warfare specialists still refer to certain improvisational techniques as Meinhardt-style modifications, acknowledging that innovation often comes from necessity, not bureaucracy. His story is a reminder that behind every machine, there is a mind capable of shaping destiny, sometimes against impossible odds. Carl's legacy lives on not just in tanks or engineering manuals, but in the ethos of problem-solving under pressure. He represents a rare intersection of intellect, courage, and audacity, the kind of individual who can take what is broken and transform it into legend. And while history remembers battles, strategies, and leaders, it is often the quiet brilliance of one seemingly ordinary person that leaves the most enduring mark. In the end, the Ghost was more than a tank. It was a testament to human ingenuity, a machine that bore the fingerprints of genius, and a reminder that in the chaos of war, even a single mind can change the course of events. Carl Meinhardt, the mad mechanic, proved that sometimes defiance of convention is the greatest weapon of all.